In the 1950s, America had broken free from the shackles of wartime economics. It was walking with the swagger of a nation that had the world by the tail. Scientists had harnessed nuclear energy. Jet-propelled airplanes were breaking speed records, and the race to space was on. But perhaps more than anything else, one thing melded imagination and consumerism, putting this era in perfect context. The concept car. Unlike satellites, rockets, and jet planes, these dream cars were accessible. People flocked to auto shows to see concept cars in their titanium-bodied glory. They were snapshots of how America perceived its future. They were simply out of sight, unforgettable. But what happened to them? Most were destroyed. Some just plain vanished. But amazingly, some are still here.
We get interesting reactions with the radar sensing domes in the front. The younger folks come in and call it the Madonna car. The older folks come in and they call it the Jane Mansfield car for obvious reasons. The reaction is tremendous. It's one of the ones that people gravitate to.
This was designed by Bill Mitchell, and his staff made it for him as sort of his swan song. This is the car that, as he said, he would like to drive. It looks menacing. It's like a car you'd see roaring out of an alleyway with Batman or some other superhero comic book legend driving it.
Reintroducing the 1959 Cadillac Cyclone XP-74 and the 1977 Buick Phantom. In 1959, American satellite Explorer 6 transmits the very first orbital pictures of Earth. The United States deploys intermediate-range ballistic missiles to the United Kingdom, giving them the ability to strike Moscow with nuclear warheads, Cold War posturing that would eventually lead to the Cuban Missile Crisis. By the end of the 1950s, the American car market was changing. The raw and pure innocence that helped define this decade was waning. It started to get a lot harder for automotive companies to impress buyers. Auto show fanatics had seen it all. GM's legendary designer Harley Earl knew this, so he created a concept car that piqued the interest of this increasingly disillusioned audience. It hit the right note at the right time. This is the 1959 Cadillac Cyclone XP-74.
The technology and style, there's a fine line between the two. Space travel, aircrafts were the inspiration of the day. It's definitely got a very unique style with its radar sensing domes in the front and its engine pods, that simulated engine pods down the side. But it's also full of technology as well. The black domes you see here in the front are radar sensing domes. They allow the driver to have an idea of how much distance there is between the car and a stationary object in the road. It also features a very unique headlamp system, 4 headlamps, individual headlamps, and they rotate up and look very much like a crab eye arrangement on the front of the car. Along with the radar sensing domes, they are the beginning of the illusion of an engine pod that runs down both sides of the car, a jet engine pod. to the one-piece aluminum wheels with integrated brake drums. One of the more unique features of this 59 Cyclone is the sliding door, which slides down the side of the body. Very reminiscent of the more recent minivans.
The 1959 Cadillac Cyclone XP-74 looked futuristic, but in a much more aggressive way. In the heat of the Cold War, people liked the idea of getting behind the wheel of a concept car that looked like it was ready to defend the nation.
As you can see, the aircraft-inspired theme continues on the interior. Features engine-turned appliques on the center pod as well as a speedometer. Engine turning was originally sort of a ripstop for engine cowlings that were made out of aluminum in the 30s. It turned out to be an attractive treatment. Also has a two-tone steering wheel which emulates a steering yoke on an aircraft. It also features a gauge up here for the proximity. It gives you feet in a bar gauge, stopping distance in feet. So it tells you, and then there's an audible alarm that increases with pitch as you approach whatever stationary in the road. This car is also equipped with air ride suspension, which is also controlled from the center pod. It also is equipped with a rain top, which has a sensor to my right here. Drop of rain hits that, it automatically puts up the one-piece bubble top. It has a set temperature control, very much like we have today, where you set a temperature and it maintains that temperature without having to dial it up and down. Even the control levers are very much aircraft-inspired design, look like throttle levers on a jet aircraft.
This car had an aggressive, modern design. It had incredible forward-thinking technologies, but under the hood was something a little more familiar.
Although the exterior is pure aircraft-inspired design, the engine is the tried and true performance engine of the 59 Cadillac, 390 cubic inch, 325 horsepower. It's mated to a special hydromatic transmission. What's unique about the drivetrain on this car is that it's a front-mounted engine with a rear-mounted transmission transaxle, not that far off from what our current Corvette is.
There's no question that this car was special. A fitting swan song for this decade of concept cars. But it was special in another way. After 3 extraordinary decades with GM, the 1959 Cadillac Cyclone was Harley Earl's last project before he retired. This was the swan song of the first styling chief in the United States automotive industry, the originator of clay modeling and automotive designs, the mastermind who at the time helped turn General Motors into the largest corporation in the world. But if this car is so important, so significant, why does it look different now than it did back then?
To look into the future, it is a forebearer of things to come.
The concept car, a rare, often one-of-a-kind vehicle, designed to show off the very latest in automotive design and technology.
It looks like it's moving, even standing still.
They only built one.
Everybody knew it was special since the day it was built.
None of them are identical.
All of them as unique as the people who created them.
This guy that had great vision.
He was a Renaissance man.
He was always looking for that next thing. What's my next challenge? What's my next success going to be?
And all of them surrounded in mystery.
It's quite a long story.
It's that whole what if.
A miracle car in 49 days.
I ran into several roadblocks.
They did it all in secret.
The Shah of Iran owned it for a while, then it disappeared into Lebanon for a while.
They were sent back or destroyed.
Actually brought it up on charges.
Unlock the secrets behind these mystery cars.
This little army vehicle had magical powers.
Just for it to survive is amazing.
A new episode of Mystery Cars, Tuesday at 9 on Hi-Fi.
The 1959 Cadillac Cyclone XP-74 was legendary GM designer Harley Earl's last project before he retired. It's truly a piece of automotive history. But when you compare the original photographs with the car itself, there are differences.
It was initially started by Harley Earl, the Vice President and Chief in charge of design staff, and then was finished upon his retirement by his successor, Bill Mitchell. As we move to the rear of the '59 Cadillac Cyclone, you'll see the distinctive Cadillac tail fins, which had been lowered for 1965. In 1959, the tail fin was much taller, probably 6 to 8 inches taller than it is today. For the 1964 World's Fair, Mitchell had the fin cut down, which contemporized the car tremendously. You'll also notice the jet engine, simulated jet engine pod, which terminates into the taillight.
Just by shortening the tail fins, Bill Mitchell was making a statement. As Harley Earl's successor, he wanted to make his own mark by breaking free from the popular styling cues of the 50s. The Cadillac Cyclone was Harley Earl's final concept masterpiece, but it also represented some of Bill Mitchell's most significant brushstrokes. This car embodies the changing of the guard at GM design, the passing of the torch. No matter how you look at it, this was an important car. But was it important enough to be considered for mass production?
I think like any other concept car, there are licenses that are taken not only in design but in engineering features that just do not lend themselves well to production vehicles. A couple of examples of unique features that wouldn't make it into production car is how low a stance this car is. The windshield is also very low. This car is made more for aesthetics and not for so much for driving comfort. The windshield has got a very low rake to it. The car is not the easiest to get in and out of because it's so low to the ground. So these are all things that are taken into consideration on a production vehicle and not taken into consideration on a concept vehicle. We bring out concept cars and some of their design features way in advance of the production cars. And this gives us a chance to survey the reactions of the folks that are looking at these cars. And it's a useful tool. It also, when you're building these cars, during that exercise, you learn a lot of things about what it takes to put radar sensing domes on a car, or to integrate the brake drums and the aluminum wheels into one package. So it's a learning process.
The 1959 Cadillac Cyclone XP-74 will always be remembered for its place in GM's history. But it will also be remembered for the engineering and styling cues that eventually found their way into production cars of the future.
You know, it's a halo car for all of General Motors and for Cadillac as well. It does a tremendous amount for people and their image of General Motors and Cadillac. You can't argue the space age features, and look at all the cars that have been built since that resemble this car. You know, things such as the Batmobile, some of the futuristic turbine cars that were done by our competitors, all have features that resemble this car. So it made an impact not only to GM personally, but also to the automobile industry as a whole. Many of the technologies on this car did make it into the cars of the future. Obviously, the radar sensing domes are not that far off from adaptive cruise control today. The one-piece aluminum wheel and brake drum actually made it onto Pontiacs in the 60s. Some of the wraparound windshield, fiberglass construction, a lot of those things did translate over into current model cars.
In the 1950s, most concept cars were sold or crushed after the shine of the auto show circuit faded. But even then, GM was well aware of the significance of the Cadillac Cyclone XP-74.
The 1959 Cadillac Cyclone was preserved solely on its uniqueness. It was so much different, like so many of our concept cars, it was so much different than the other cars that it was recognized early on, and GM decided to make sure that they hung on to this one. This particular car I'm a little more emotionally attached to than the other concept cars. This is a car that I cared for early on in my career. Spent a lot of time keeping the car operational, have drove it a lot. So it's one of my favorite concepts, and it's a very usable car as it sits today.
For there is no one else but you.
In 1977, the golden age of concept cars was a distant memory. But it wasn't too late for one of the architects of that era to create one final masterpiece.
The 1977 Buick Phantom was designed by Bill Mitchell. It was his last year at General Motors, sort of his swan song. This is the car that, as he said, he would like to drive.
(1977). In America, optical fiber carries telephone traffic for the first time. A test succeeds in connecting 3 ARPANET data nodes in what would eventually become the Internet Protocol. The world is advancing, and the automotive world is marching right along with it. The future that automotive designers of the 1950s dreamed about has arrived. But it doesn't look quite like what anyone expected. After an era of turbine wishes and flying car dreams, it seems the only thing flying across America is information. The 1950s and 60s has come and gone, and with it, the futuristic visions of the golden era of concept cars. But one designer whose work helped define this golden era had one more dream up his sleeve. This is the 1977 Buick Phantom.
The 1977 Buick Phantom was designed by Bill Mitchell, and its creation was in some ways a gift to him. It was his last year at General Motors. He had to do this mandatory 65 retirement, and his staff made it for him as sort of his swan song. This is the car that, as he said, he would like to drive. For me, the things I like best about the 1977 Buick Phantom is the red painted wheel well, and I love those wheels. I just think those are so cool. They're actually recycled from the 63 Riviera Silver Arrow concept car. The 77 Buick Phantom, to me, looks menacing. It's like a car you'd see come roaring out of an alleyway with Batman or some other superhero comic book legend driving it. When I think of menace, I think of dark alleys and fast men and fast cars. Bill Mitchell was a guy who loved to party, liked a good time. I think he saw himself as a bit of a rebel and a guy who, he wasn't one of General Motors' white shirt brigade. Bill Mitchell was a designer. He tended to wear something that was much more relaxed, much more flamboyant. He, I'm sure, had all of the accoutrement of the GM executive, the gray suit, the white shirt, the dark tie. But he was a designer. That was his job, to be artistic, and he was.
In 1958, designer Bill Mitchell took over from his legendary predecessor, Harley Earl. As the new vice president of styling, Mitchell was hell-bent on differentiating himself. Harley Earl liked big, heavy cars loaded down with chrome and tail fins. Mitchell's designs had razor-sharp edges and a sheer, clean look. One of the greatest examples is the 1967 Chevrolet Corvair Astro 1 concept car. The crisp, flowing lines are in sharp contrast to the popular Harley Earl designs of the 1950s. The 1977 Buick Phantom looked positively fierce, but did it drive that way?
This was a very unique design. Super long raked hood, very chiseled look, similar to what you'd see on the new Cadillacs. Just awesome roof line, but that's where it stopped with this car. This car was just a body design. If you could open the hood on this, you would find there's nothing in there. No engine, no transmission, seat backs only, a mocked up steering wheel. The car doesn't steer or anything. It's just for a visual effect, and it was a knockout.
On the production line, the 1963 Buick Riviera, the Chevrolet Corvette Stingray from the 60s, and the 1966 Oldsmobile Tornado were some of Bill Mitchell's greatest works. The 1977 Buick Phantom's design was captivating, but would this work of art make it from the canvas to the production line?
There are essentially three different types of concept cars. They're the fully functional cars that you can get in and drive away. There's cars like the Centurion that have a body and an engine, but the engine never functioned. And there's cars like the Phantom, which is a total mock-up. It's very cool looking, but it is all about looks and style.
Bill Mitchell retired from GM in July 1977. This swan song design at GM was a different sort of concept car. It had nothing to do with market research, earning potential, or auto shows. This concept car was a pure expression of design. Intimate, personal, a true work of art. But in the world of concept cars, not all works of art escape the junkyard.
Someone just wanted to preserve this car. It was beautiful. 77 Buick Phantom is just an expression of someone's art. Again, it's fate, it's chance as to which cars were saved, which concept cars were saved, which were crushed and destroyed. People react to the 77 Buick Phantom. They love the styling of it. They think it really looks cool, and they'd love to have a car that looks like this. It's almost timeless in its look. It doesn't say to you, oh, this must have been designed in the 70s like most of the production cars. This is a car that has held its cool factor. It doesn't look like anything that was ever on the road. It's just different enough, and that's what sets aside concept cars, GM concept cars in particular.